I would like to talk about one of the most important methods that the Darwinists use to carry out their propaganda. They use different illustrations, and there was a new exhibition in Frankfurt, and they tried to show different skulls to people in order to carry out their propaganda. There are 27 different photographs, and they are trying to present this to the people as if this is the so-called evolution of people. This is the Australopithecus afarensis. This is the fossil that belongs to Lucy. They are presenting this as if this was a stage from the passage of the apes to the human beings. This was a so-called claim, a false claim of the evolutionists, but then they withdrew their claims. It was understood that this had no relation with human beings at all. It was understood that this was only an animal. On the third photograph, I can show you that this is another illustration. This belongs to Australopithecus africanus. Again, the gender of this animal was not really specified. They give a lot of detailed information saying that it had a very wide jaw and a very wide bone structure there, and they claim that to be actually an intermediary species. However, this has no relation with human beings at all. It's exactly an animal species. And here it is a Paranthropus aethiopicus, and also they noted that there is very little known about this, and they made a very interesting note once again, saying that if we were to look at its mouth, actually it had no mouth. They couldn't most probably find its teeth, and they say that it's able to swallow large food and consume the plants, and it's very apparent that they are making all kinds of false claims, and when they cannot find any specific information, they couldn't find the teeth of this animal most probably, and then they started making all kinds of fairy tales, all kinds of stories. But definitely no person who is using his religion, his ration, would ever be finding such claims reasonable. And the evolutionists are expecting people to accept these storytelling. Definitely all evidences should be provided to devastate their claims, collapse their claims, and this is very easy because they base their claims on no science. They have no evidence from science. And Australopithecus definitely means that this is an ape. There are only 120 species remaining from the 6,000 different ape species, and they are trying to name each organism with such titles, saying that as if they are intermediary links. They are putting different names in the front of those animals, and whatever names they give them, actually, those are clearly apes. And we also know that in the Neanderthals, we find them to be human races, and many speculation is carried on the Neanderthals as if they are presented to people to be a kind of an intermediary species. However, definitely that has been devastated by the findings in the caves. In those caves, actually, they came across that 50,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were living there. They took care of the wounded ones, they took care of the diseased ones, and also they buried their dead people, and also they used different plants as pharmacy. And those fossils that were found in the caves, actually, where those Neanderthal people lived, showed these proofs, but evolutionists tried to show as if those Neanderthals were a mixture, an intermediary race between apes and human beings. Definitely, this has been changed, this has been collapsed by means of scientific findings. Their claims are irrational, and unreasonable, and they are trying to impose such propaganda on people, and they are trying to deceive people. However, all the new findings, all the new fossils, and these fossils that were found in the cave in Spain actually, were making a response, a clear response against evolutionists, because all those Neanderthals are truly people like us. For instance, the pygmies in Australia, they were again presented to be animal-like people, actually, intermediary people. Therefore, those ones were greatly oppressed. And their sequence, that they put all these organisms in a sequence, actually, that is not based on science again. They find certain skulls. For instance, they also find women's skulls, and they claim those skulls to be an ancestor of the apes, because they say that the women's skulls have not developed yet, not evolved yet, and therefore they are trying to establish the basis for social Darwinism, and they have no scientific grounds for their claims. They are only using their imagination, and what they have actually, they have 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth in those illustrations that you have shown. Just like in the past they had shown that there was a horse series that was a so-called evolution of the horses actually, but when people looked and discovered and inspected those horses actually, they realized that they were individual animals, that were different individual horse species which had perfect body structures, which had perfect organ systems, and there was definitely no primitiveness in none of them. And also, even those claims were also very irrational, because all those animal species, all those horse species were actually living at the same time. And by making such claims, evolutionists were again showing their storytelling, because they were claiming that the ancestors of an organism were living with the next generations at the same time. So these are only the propaganda that evolutionists are making. Just by picturing that different organisms look like one another, they try to inculcate people as if these are coming from one another. Just assume that children are, in their elementary school training, given different materials in their hands, and they make certain toys, and those toys are put in a sequence, and they claim that those are coming from one another in an ancestral relationship. And while making those illustrations, they could say that those different reconstructions were of Chinese origin, of Turkish origin. They could also make such claims. And many of those are actually apes that they have been drawing, illustrating. And they are trying to make a kind of a human-like face on those apes. And it's really very amazing that the apes have really human-like gestures. For instance, they get mad while they're washing dishes. But that doesn't really mean that those apes turn out to act like human beings by talking to one another, by caring for one another, by speaking with one another in a conscious manner.